Hello everyone, just a couple of announcements. First, I am now on Twitter, so there's that. I'm sure the point of that will make itself be known in the near future. To be honest, I'm not the most proficient when it comes to social networking sites, and I have only a personal Facebook page, so Twitter is new to me. But anyway, it's there, so follow me on Twitter. I guess that's what they say, follow me. Sounds a bit arrogant and misleading. We're not going anywhere, but there you go. Anyway, second, I have a couple new t-shirt designs in my store where I did not put my face there, so check those out. I'd like to go ahead and get into this week's comment because it is a longer one and I'd like to address it point by point. I picked this comment because I've noticed a tendency for people who respond to comments to soft-serve themselves with people who agree with them or people who disagree but poorly represent their disagreement, and I think I was doing the same thing. So to make sure I don't fall in line with that complete cherry-picking bullshit style, I've chosen some well-worded criticism. It comes from Unnamed Enemy 9, who writes, I'm enormously disappointed in you, Raw Man. Steve's video had flaws and was very limited, but you are accusing Shives of making fallacious and weak arguments, then turning around and doing exactly that. This is what rape culture is, according to Wikipedia. A phrase used to describe a culture in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender, sex, and sexuality. Example behaviors commonly associated with rape culture include victim blaming, sexual objectification, trivializing rape, denial of widespread rape, or refusing to acknowledge the harm of certain forms of sexual violence that do not conform to certain stereotypes of stranger or violent rape. Steve mentioned several of the traits listed there, so he didn't redefine it. You're cutting out parts of the definition that you're using. First, the definition in Wikipedia was as I quoted it when I wrote the script, so the definition was changed between then and now to the one you gave. If you scroll down to the bottom of any Wikipedia page, you are able to see when the last time the page was edited or changed. I really wish I had gotten a screen capture of it at the time, but from now on I will be sure to do this. Second, I do have a problem with two of the examples. The denial of widespread rape, which is in affirming the consequent fallacy. There are other reasons why denial of widespread rape would exist. The first that comes to mind is if there is a lack of widespread rape, it is most definitely reasonable to deny the claim that there is. The example Steve gave of victim blaming isn't victim blaming. It most certainly is acceptance of the rape myth that how a woman dresses increases or decreases her chances of being raped. Only after the fact, which is not how he presented the argument, could it be considered victim blaming. For example, if someone says, "So you were raped, were you dressed all skimpy?" would it be victim blaming? While this may seem trivial, when presenting an argument for victim blaming, it is best to give an actual example as opposed to an example of rape myth acceptance. As a side note here, he never did show how rape culture actually exists in the U.S. by his definition or either of Wikipedia's. The second example I have a problem with is the last one, quote, certain forms of sexual violence that do not conform to certain stereotypes of stranger or violent rape, unquote. This is too vague. I would suggest rape culture proponents stop being so vague so they can just shove in there anything they want and call it a certain form of sexual violence, and start being more specific in what they are talking about. It's not about approving of rape, it's about normalizing it, which is not the same thing, most commonly by trivializing it or denying it outright. And trying to claim that yours is the sole definition is bullshit, since people can't fully agree on it. Even the definition we're using, which as far as I can tell is the most common, is subject to at least some amount of discussion and disagreement. Trivializing and denying are not normalizing. These three terms are not synonymous with each other, and I think this part of your comment hits the nail on the head on where at least I have the problem with agreeing that a rape culture exists within the U.S. There is a severe lack of consensus on how certain terms will be used. I must place this on the side of those who would call normalizing the same thing as trivializing. Normalizing within the realm of sociology is when ideas or actions come to be seen as normal and natural in everyday life. This comes in two forms: the construction of an idealized norm, such as takes place in training for jobs or tasks. Second is the normalization process theory, which is a true middle-range theory that aims to integrate theory and empirical research. If we were to normalize rape, it most certainly would not fall within the first form, because I think it's safe to say that there are no training centers that teach people how to rape. If we do so in an attempt to research it from a sociological perspective, this can only help to understand it better, as opposed to sensationalizing the problem to that of a prolific culture that results from a perceived patriarchal society. While this perception of an imbalance of power between men and women may be accurate, this does not directly result in the existence of a rape culture. Saying so can only lead to misunderstanding the problem that does exist, how it came to exist, and how best to solve the problem. Final note on this part of your comment: I must protest identifying the definitions I gave as my definitions, as I sourced and provided links to two separate but common definitions. They were not my definitions. And you are leaving out something rather important when you bring up the decline in rapes over the last few decades. All violent crime has been decreasing. Not to mention the simple fact that because something exists doesn't make it all-encompassing, absolute, or even predominant. In other words, just because rape culture exists doesn't mean that it is absolute or as bad as it's always been. For this one, I'm afraid I do not see how that invalidates the point I made in the video. In fact, it serves an unrelated point that violence in general in the U.S. has decreased. I say unrelated because we have narrowed the topic specifically to rape culture, and the only violent crime that is related to that topic is rape itself. Your last statement I can mostly agree with, except I would just say because rape exists and happens doesn't mean that there is a rape culture. There are definitely social issues that women have been dealing with and that need to be addressed. But again, shoehorning these issues, such as sexism in the workplace, into the definition of rape culture does both sexism issues and rape culture a disservice by resulting in them being taken less serious. Not to mention women who do live in societies where a rape culture inarguably exists are being done a disservice by equating sexism in the workplace to being raped. If people identify the common radicalist definition of the term rape culture with the true definition, those women living in other societies who actually deal with a rape culture as an academic source would define it will see little, if any, justice for the atrocities they endure. And raw man, people do blame women for being raped, and more frequently sexually harassed because of how they dress. You also completely miss the analogy. He's not talking about saying, hey, you might want to lock your doors just in case, or hey, you might want to cover up just in case. He's talking very explicitly about saying it's your own fault for not locking your door, wearing sexy clothes, and yes, it does happen, probably more often than you think. I will say, however, that it was a terrible analogy because the two events are not very comparable. If that's the case, you might want to tell him that, because not only his example of victim blaming, but the analogy itself is all before the fact. He is not explicitly talking about blaming a victim after the crime or assault has occurred, but blaming those who are potential victims for not taking preventative measures. While the example of preventative measure against rape is an error in judgment and prescribing to rape myth, it still is, as he described it, a suggested preventative measure, not blaming a victim after the fact. As far as actual victim blaming, I am sure it happens, especially in the courtroom as a defense strategy. I am also sure that some people within our society think it matters, but again, I cannot agree that this constitutes an entire rape culture of any size, but the continued perpetuation of a rape myth. As I said in my video, telling people how and why rape occurs is educating them. It is the only way to kill these myths. Insisting that there is a secret acceptance or approval of rape in the face of evidence to the contrary by shoving every form of sexism or sexual harassment in its definition only dilutes it and every issue one puts in there. And Steve's strawman about men playing the victim doesn't seem like a strawman to me, considering the sheer number of people I've seen on YouTube who insist that talking about rape culture at all is an attempt to make all men out to be rapists and rapists to be. Hell, I've seen it brought out in the comments of Steve's earlier videos about feminism and the men's rights movement. And again, you are going beyond what he actually said. He was talking about men insisting that they are being victimized just by talking about this subject. And that last straw man, while it doesn't reflect the views and positions of many, it does exist. I'm going to have to ask for citations on this one. I did a number of YouTube searches and went as deep as 5 pages into the results and found not a single person saying that talking about rape culture at all is an attempt to make all men out to be rapists. However, I have provided a list of other videos I found wherein reasoned counterpoints are offered on the assertion that rape culture exists, whether or not it harms men, and so on, just for further viewing if you wish. The first one, which I actually recommend people watch, actually shows how certain popular statistics do not represent the reality of the situation, citing dishonest research methods and manipulations of the research findings. I did not look into the claims being made. I'll leave that up to anyone who watches that video. Directly below that is a list of videos in other media where the claim that all men are potential rapists is made. In truth, this assertion, as far as I'm concerned, does more harm to women than men. I think I've come to understand it to mean that women should think this when in social situations, but if men are taking this a different way, it is up to those making the statement to offer clarification, as opposed to the mocking that Steve offered. If a woman walks around suspecting every man is a rapist and behaves accordingly, this only affects her. She could walk right by me and think I am a potential rapist and live in that state of fear. I won't even know, and I will live my life as I do, not raping anyone. Thank you, Unnamed Enemy 9, for your comment. While I mainly offered counterpoints, I do want to stress to you and anyone watching this video that I did seriously consider every point you made. Rewatched my video a couple of times and Steve's video without my commentary to influence my thinking. Well, until tomorrow, you all have a great day.